the kind of the biggest part of this movie, right, is Spectre. So McClory chapter closes. When we talked 3 years ago, when we were talking about Thunderball, this was the beginning of this long chapter with Eon Productions and Kevin McClory, who was the rights owner of the Thunderball story for film, not necessarily the book, which Ian Fleming actually held the rights onto the book, because I believe Spectre first appears in Thunderball.
The book, yeah.
Spectre doesn't show up in Dr. No or From Russia with Love in the books. And that's why, even though they were using it in the first 2 movies, they were using Spectre in the very first 2 Bond films.
I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. The 4 great cornerstones of power, headed by the greatest brains in the world.
They got around it, but at the same time, all of this stuff was happening all at once. But they were still able to use Blofeld in other films because he was in some of those other books after Thunderball, of course. And I think it was just because they were like, well, the lawsuit hasn't been settled, so like, let's just use it.
Quick recap is one tiny little mistake on Ian Fleming's part has rippled into this tsunami of shit that Eon has dealt with for 50 years?
I call it Fleming's one creative folly. That is what this is. Finally, after many years of back and forth of lawsuits due to Fleming's one creative folly with Kevin McClory, the McClory estate, because he had passed away, 2006, just to clarify, he passed away in 2006. So the McClory estate settled with Dan Jack, the company that is the rights owner of the Bond franchise, in 2013. That's a year after Skyfall had come out. And then this movie came out in 2015, which in turn allowed Eon Productions the rights to use Blofeld in the organization of Spectre once again in their films. If you recall, the last time Blofeld was seen in any of the Bond films was in For Your Eyes Only, and really only to be used as a middle finger cameo to McClory. The character is never named but hinted at. So there is some question as if they were like, oh, we think we're going to get the rights back because McClory's passed away and we're settling on it. So start writing that Spectre script. Or Eon's like, we got Spectre back. Great. Let's use them. Start writing the script. Like it could have been either one of those things. So returning to write the script of the next film was screenwriter of Skyfall, John Logan, with rewrites by Bond writers duo Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, as well as Jez Butterworth. That's his name is Jez. I think that's funny.
Okay.
Jez Butterworth, and then an interview with Ralph Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes.
Was it
Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes.
With an interview with Ray Fiennes, and he had said that there was a pitch by Mendez to have the new M be secretly a villain, which I think Fiennes shot down. I can see why he'd shoot it down. It actually makes sense why I think they would shoot it down, but I actually like this next idea even more, which I think would have helped the movie. There was also a draft that had Tanner being a Spectre mole. So either of those ideas would have been better for this movie, I think.
Would that have gelled with the previous movies?
Maybe, maybe not. We're not sure. I mean, it could have been like, hey, don't do any Spectre things. Like, you just gather information.
The movie doesn't just go, hey, Blofeld's here. Let's just let Blofeld do his Blofeld thing. Instead, the whole time Blofeld's trying to justify his own existence in the movie. That being said, if Tanner suddenly was bad, then it'd be like, oh, Tanner was the one who showed Bond where Patrice is. Tanner is the one who was there to lead Bond along these adventures at the behest of Blofeld. As I said, if there were any breadcrumbs that pointed, any Thanosian breadcrumbs that showcased that Blofeld has been there the whole time, having Tanner be the mechanism of that would have worked, because obviously there were no breadcrumbs of Blofeld in those movies, even if they used cheap flashbacks to show when Tanner's like, you should go after Patrice. Look, because remember, he's like, he's a ghost. Nobody knows where he is. But I found him.
He's a ghost, no known residence or country of origin.
So how do we find him?
Well, luckily, we still have 1 or 2 friends left in the CIA.
That would at least be something that would be like, wow, they did kind of plan this out. Or there were breadcrumbs, but they didn't. So I actually kind of think that would have been a good move.
Hey, real quick. Are you hearing like a bump? Or is that just me?
Probably
I keep hearing
kids.
a bump.
Probably your
No.
kids.
It's like a computer, did it? Did you not hear that? I don't know what it is. I keep hearing it. It keeps popping up. Okay, so anyway, Sam Mendes does return to direct after Skyfall. This is the first director in a long time to do consecutive films. Mm-hmm. The last being John Glenn with License to Kill. There is some discrepancy I found with Mendez returning, because at one point they did approach Nicholas Winding Refn to actually direct, which would have been kind of cool because I really do like Drive. He is a little bit more of an auteur director, and I think it would have kind of been an interesting choice.
We talked about the dangers of an auteur, just how it's like, it might be too stylish.
He's stylish in a way that I think doesn't really gel. Like, I think Christopher Nolan being an auteur, he gels very well with James Bond.
Nolan, I have no doubt, would respect the material and wouldn't try to put his thumbprint on it. Maybe Refn would do the same.
He would. I think Nolan would, because he's even said, like, he's like, if I'm doing Bond, it's going to be my James Bond, and I don't think people want me to make my James Bond. But I think it's his thumbprint would be more in line to what people are used to watching James Bond movies, if that makes sense. Refn, on the other hand, I think with his stylistic choices are kind of a little farther out there, especially if you see some of his more recent films that were kind of on the more bizarre end.
Yeah.
But he may have been a good choice. I don't know. So, but really part of this was Mendez was like, well, I kind of want to take a break. I don't want to do another Bond movie right away, because he wanted to go back to doing the theater. But Mendez had said that he didn't want to come back, and he decided he would after seeing the future of Bond films were planned to film originally back to back. So they originally had a plan. They wanted to film this movie and the next movie back to back. The idea then got shot down to basically allowing for a Mendez schedule, because Mendez was like, well, I'll come back. And then they were like, okay, well, we'll make it 2014. And so you come back and then we'll get the movie out by 2015. So at one point, the idea for this film was going to be a two-parter, which may have explained some of the issues that I think you and I will discuss.
So
because I do feel like there's a lot of stuff in this movie that feels like this should have been two parts or had been the beginning of like a trilogy of Blofeld films. Another part of that could have been Craig, because there was a lot of times when they were talking about making this film, Craig had said some things about, playing James Bond that he was done, or that he wanted to stab his eyes out, or he would do anything else than play James Bond at this point. And I really think that was mainly because he had even said, it's like, I was tired. I hadn't seen my family in over a year or so. I rather want to do something else. I don't want to go strictly playing back to James Bond.
He clearly has shown that, unlike Sean Connery, yes, Sean Connery did want to get away from the character, but Sean Connery is James Bond in a way.
Like, that whole motif was him.
When he's smacking Tiffany Case.
You sound like a cop to me.
He's channeling himself. Like, he's playing himself in that moment.
You did an interview in which you said, it's not the worst thing to slap a woman now and then. As I remember, you said you don't do it with a clenched fist. It's better to do it with an open hand. Yeah, remember that? Yeah. And I didn't love that.
I haven't changed my opinion.
Whereas Daniel Craig did everything he could to be like, I'm not Bond. The different commercials and things he's been in have been, I'm not just James Bond. I'm this really talented guy, which he is. But it's like he did everything he could. Like, the guy would put on a dress if it means he could show that he's not James Bond, which I have mixed feelings about. But I get it. I get that it's like you're an artist, and yet everybody associates you with this character that you aren't. Remember, as far back as You Only Live Twice? Sean Connery being interviewed on being James Bond, and he was just wearing a wife beater or something. The guy said, is this how James Bond dresses? And he's like, I'm not James Bond. I'm Sean Connery. Like, come on, But can you imagine that level of like, any famous person has to deal with that. That's why fame is a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, it's like, hey, I've finally made it. I'm finally rich and famous because I found a character that I was born to play. But then at the same time, just showing how the black box is that powerful that people watch it enough that their reality is overtaken by a manufactured reality, to the point where it's like, you are that person. You are James Bond, and you can't ever be any other character because you are James Bond. Must be bizarre, For those of us on the outside, we go, that sounds fun. For those on the inside, they're like, it's ruined my life. You think it's a blessing? It's a curse. That perfect sweet spot of fame would be Michael G. Wilson. Can you imagine being Mikey G. Wiz and nobody knows who you are? We know who he is. If we saw, I have a T-shirt with his face on it. Like, if I saw him, I'd know it was him. But your average person has no idea who he is.
I have no idea who that is. Who's Mikey G. Wiz?
Exactly.
You'll know.
Once again, did you catch the Mikey G. Wiz cameo in this movie?
I didn't.
He is in the scene where Mallory goes to talk to C, right before he calls him a cocky little bastard. Mikey G. Wiz is talking to C, and then Mikey G. Wiz fucks off, and then they have their moment.
You're a cocky little bastard, aren't you?
Once again, Mikey G. Wiz is just hanging out in hallways, just like he was in Skyfall.
So this film doesn't have Roger Deakins, which was a huge point about Skyfall that people always like to bring up. But maybe they got the next best thing in this film, and that was Hoyt van Hoytma. I love saying that name, Hoyt van Hoytma.
Did you look up how to say that?
Hoyt.
You
van
had to
Hoytma. I was watching a video of like famous cinematographers and the cameras they use, and he was one of them. But he is starting. I think he is slowly starting to get a name for himself. But he was much like Deakins, but mainly because he associates himself with Nolan. He's like been Christopher Nolan's main DP for the last 5 movies he's done.
He took over for
Wally Pfister.
For Wally Pfister.
Pfister, yeah.
Yeah. Remember, I think on a live stream I told the story of how I was at a talk with Wally Pfister, and he was walking out, and I was sitting at the very back, and he walked by me, and I just go, "Thanks, Wally." And he turned, and he was like he basically gave me like the ending of Breakfast Club, and I just was like we had a moment. We had a moment.
You nerd.
Because at the time, what happened was he was working on his directorial debut, which crashed and burned, and he hasn't worked
I remember that.
ever since, apparently.
Yeah.
So,
right.
I mean, he took a chance on stepping up into
good
that
for him.
role.
I hope he comes back.
Do you think he's coming back?
I don't know.
I hope he comes back, too.
I hope he does something and someone brings him back.
Yes, really cool, down-to-earth guy. I mean, the guy shot The Dark Knight.
Right.
So anyway, he gets replaced by this other guy who more or less, it's like Nolan was looking for the same guy. He has a very similar
style.
Exactly.
Hoyt van Hoytma, if you look at all of his films, they are the very crisp. Like, this is why I keep saying, like, if Nolan were to do a Bond film, it wouldn't be that much of a stretch from what they've been doing with all the Craig films, because I think his style kind of lends very heavily to it.